Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Oh, thank you so much. And if you're wondering, happy Valentine's Day. You know, there's a lot more to Valentine's Day than candy hearts, red roses, and awkward dinner reservations. And our guest today, Dr. Andrew Roth, is here to prove it. From pagan rituals involving goat meat to Victorian lace cards and $1 million chocolate sales, Valentine's Day has a past that's as strange as it is sweet. So how did a Roman fertility rite turn into a holiday that now celebrates not only lovers, but teachers, grandkids, and even pets? And why does this unofficial day of affection still strike such a chord across generations? For those of us in life's second half, this story matters. Many of us have lived through decades of changing traditions, love letters turning into emojis, handmade cards replaced by text messages. Dr. Roth, a Smithsonian Associate and Scholar, writer, and longtime observer of American culture, shows us how Valentine's Day is not just a commercial bonanza, but a mirror reflecting how society and our relationships have evolved. Today's conversation is funny, surprising, and yes, even a little romantic. But more than anything, it reminds us that love, in all its messy, sentimental forms, never really goes out of style. With this wonderful music in the background that brings us right back to memory-filled Valentine's days of years past, this is an episode you'll want to savor like a fine chocolate. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. You're listening to the Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Roth. Dr. Andrew Roth, Smithsonian Associate, welcome to the program.
Nice to be here with you, Paul.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you about our subject today. Valentine's Day is coming up. You are going to be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up too. We'll have links so that our audience can find out more about your work, Andrew Roth, as well as your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation about Valentine's Day. And I wonder if we can just start with this title I found in reference to you. You call Valentine's Day the holiday of saints, sex, sentiment, and chocolate. That is quite a range there. And so I wonder if it is quite a range. Which of those four, saints, sex, sentiment, and chocolate, surprised you most in your research of this holiday? And which do you think most people will misunderstand about Valentine's Day?
Well, those are two really good questions. I think the thing that got me the most interested in it was I got onto this topic. I have a larger series I do for the Jefferson Educational Society on American holidays. And I got into it because I was trying in our, shall we say, interesting times, looking for those things Americans hold in common that somehow maybe are immune to some polarization. And so I've worked out a series on American holidays, and Valentine's Day came up as one of them. And the thing that got me most intrigued, that caught me off guard, and then I realized it as part of the trend, probably would have been, of the things, sex sentiment and chocolate, saint sex sentiment and chocolate would have been, in fact, probably the sex. Valentine's Day was part of an overt strategy by the early Christian church. I call it the Christianization of pagan rituals, and it'd be a topic that we could go off here for a long time on that. But beginning with Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th or 7th century, in a letter to Augustine of Canterbury, he said that it was acceptable to modern jargon, we'd say co-op pagan practices if it enabled the missionary to convert. Uh, and interestingly enough, although the origins of Valentine's Day predate that, it's exactly what happened. And so that was kind of interesting thing to me, is that the deep roots in a fairly explicit eroticism. Now, that gets tamed over the next 2 millennia, so that the real arc of the holiday is, how does it evolve from, this is a little bit of an inaccuracy. Someone in a Smithsonian audience, undoubtedly Murphy's Law, somebody knows. Valentine's Day is not the direct descendant of the Roman festival of the Lupercalia, but it came into existence by an early pope, I believe his name is Gelasius' attempt to suppress the Lupercalia. So he created a religious feast day honoring Saint Valentine. Turns out there's 3 of them, and it's possible none of them ever actually existed, but that's a different thread. And he created a feast day in order to suppress a revival of it. And this all happens in about the late 5th century. And so that was kind of it. That was probably the thing that was most interesting. And then you trace that arc over the 2 millennia, and how the holiday has increasingly been domesticated, but never quite completely lost that, shall we say, sensual origin.
Well,
Kind of long-winded answer.
Oh, but that's helpful. It's also it's so helpful, I think, too, to think of this in terms of things that bring us together, and I think we need that. And so I think, from the days when school children exchanged Valentine's Day heart candy, romantic dinners. All of this evolution, I think, is a good point. When did it evolve? Was it over the last 50 years? Was it longer than that into this holiday?
No, Valentine's Day is a very old holiday. If you take it from, and I have the exact date somewhere. I actually have it in the presentation, the exact date, but I'm thinking it's something like 496 AD, when Pope Gelasius creates the original St. Valentine's Day. For literally not quite a millennium, for about 1,000 years, it's a religious holiday. And there's not a lot of evidence of the romantic overtones. Although if you go back to Roman culture at the very beginning, it got confused with another Roman holiday, the festival of Anna Karenina, which occurs on March 15th. In the old Roman calendar, March 1st was New Year's Day. March was the first month of the year. And all of this gets tied up in fertility rituals, because in agricultural societies, well, today's Groundhog Day as we do this interview, which is a heritage of that. In agricultural societies, it was incredibly important, particularly in the northern climate. It was incredibly important to begin to determine when you could do spring planting. And so all of these things have their roots in fertility rituals. Valentine's Day is one of them. But from that attempt by Gelasius to suppress this revival of the old Roman holiday called the Lupercalia, for about 1,000 years, it's a religious feast day with some undertones in peasant cultures, not just peasant cultures, high cultures of it's because of the fertility aspect of its erotic, not romantic. And then somewhere around the end of the 14th century, the 1300s, Chaucer writes a famous poem called The Parliament of Fowls, which is the first time in the English-speaking world that it's directly linked. Valentine's Day is directly linked with romantic love. And what the Parliament of Fowls, real quickly, a 30-second summary is, it's springtime. All of the birds have migrated back north. They hold a congress or a conclave in which they choose their mates. Actually, early feminism, the formal, which is the female eagle, she gets to choose her mate. The others, it's kind of done either randomly or they're assigned. And that is the first time. It's a poem he wrote in honor of the engagement of Richard II and Anne of Bohemia. So there's also that element. And that is the first time St. Valentine is explicitly, or at least that we have existing documents associated with what we would later call romantic love. The Parliament of Fowls was actually an attempt to tame, or maybe not tame, that's the wrong word, an attempt to justify the cult of courtly love. Because in 1400, Charles VI of France has the first holiday celebrating the court of love. And so it's actually, for about this first 1,000 years, it was more or less a religious holiday. And then you have this transformation.
One of the things that I found in my research for our conversation today and that you cite is that it's really not an official holiday anywhere in the world, yet it's celebrated in more countries than really any other holiday. Again, this idea of kind of bringing us together. Do you think that this sentiment behind the holiday of celebration of love and this idea of spending on one another. Do you think that that's the real stickiness for all of us, or what is it that appeals to us all about this day?
Well, I think you touched on it. It's a holiday celebrating togetherness, but it's also a holiday celebrating romantic love. And romantic love, without getting into some pedantic analysis of the different interpretations of what that phrase means, but mutual attraction is a global experience. And this is a holiday that celebrates mutual attraction. Male, female, well, pair bonding, gender neutral comment, all types of pair bonding. It is a holiday that celebrates togetherness, pair bonding, the erotic undertone of that, the romantic overtone of that. And so that's universal. And it also, by the time it is spread around the world, you got to remember, as I said, for about 1,000 years, more or less, it's a religious holiday of some minor importance. It's a religious holiday. And then there's this transformation because there was always this undercurrent because of its Roman origins. It is actually a non-sectarian religious holiday. Once the saint drops away and it just becomes Valentine's Day, then it can be open to anyone, everywhere, because any study of world literature is just human nature. It's human nature. The heart will want what the heart wants.
Absolutely.
That's transcultural. There's just that's global, universal. I'd like to find somebody who tells me there's a culture somewhere in the world that doesn't exist, that kind of attraction. And I'll just say, well, okay.
Yeah, there's the one and only, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, there's been
that
this.
I think explains it. Kind of getting at what you've been asking me in the presentation I'll do for the Smithsonian. I point out that you can trace the evolution of Valentine's Day by tracing the different meanings of the word Valentine. The word Valentine begins as Saint Valentine. It's a religious holiday. Then when we get to the late Middle Ages, the early English Renaissance in particular, you see the transformation is Valentine becomes the object of your affection. So won't you be my Valentine? So that it is now shifted. It's no longer a saint, and actually the word saint begins to drop away. We can come back to that. And a Valentine is the object of my affection, my lover. And then later we discover in the late 18th, early 19th century, it changes again to mean a card, a greeting card. And then it changes again in the late 19th, early 20th century to just mean this holiday celebrating affiliative, to use fancy language, affiliative behavior, romantic attraction. And so it evolves. And what's happened is, of course, the word saint has dropped off. No one calls it, well, I shouldn't say no one calls it, some people might, but as a general rule, no one calls it Saint Valentine's Day anymore. It's Valentine's Day. And I suspect, particularly in our secular culture, I suspect there's any number of people who might be surprised that it was actually originally a religious feast day.
Yeah, because there is a great deal of grumbling during this time, 1800s, 18th century, 19th century, about the printed card, as you refer to it. So as the saint gets dropped away from Valentine's Day and the emphasis changes to these printed cards, the sentiment changes as well. Do you think the sentiment is lost, or is it just this state of change that's going on?
That's an interesting question about media in some ways. The mass production of cards occurs in England initially. It's the Postal Reform Act of 1840, I believe, Sir Rowland Hall. And it is the Postal Reform Act that creates the postage stamp. The 1 cent, in fact, it was called the penny black, the 1 cent postage stamp. Prior to that, sending something was more complicated and more expensive. And Valentine's cards go from somewhere around, I have them in the presentation, but I'm going to say 40,000 in 1840. In 1860, it's 400,000. By 1875, it's just under 1 million. So it explodes. Yeah. So what happens is in the middle of the 19th century in England and then in America, you have what was once a handmade personal creation, a card that you created yourself, has now become a commercially produced card. And so there were some purists who, objected to that, but actually it was an overwhelming success. But it actually massified, if you will, the holiday.
And one of the people kind of at the very start of all of this kind of commercialization timing of Valentine's Day is a woman by the name of Esther Howland, and she's referred to as the mother of American Valentine.
Yes.
And she ran a successful business, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about her. But what does that story tell us about this idea of entrepreneurship and commercialization and then the sentimentality of this particular holiday?
Well, I'm actually, I do another program, and I do a program called the American Tapestry Project, which is a podcast. And I talk about how there's no such thing as the American story, but there are many American stories, and the metaphor of the tapestry, if you weave them together, you have the story of America. And one of the threads I've been working on in the last year or two is the history of the women's movement. Esther Howland is an example of that in mid-19th century America. The commercial production of Valentine's cards began in Great Britain. Dickens called it Cupid's Manufactory. It's Jonathan King, who was a London stationer, did it. But Valentine's cards then came to America in the 1830s, 1840s. And they were making this transformation from a handicraft thing, as something that you made very specifically for a person, to a mass-produced thing. Esther Howland is one of the original graduates of Mount Holyoke. Her family, actually, she's descended from a passenger on the Mayflower. Her father owned a stationer's shop in Worcester, Massachusetts. Her mother actually wrote the New England Cookbook. And Howland was working for her father in the shop, and one of his colleagues sent her a Valentine's card, and she saw the thing, and she said, well, I can do better than this. And she then created a Valentine's card. She then gave samples to her brother, who was kind of the salesperson who went around central Massachusetts and into Massachusetts and Connecticut. And she thought if she got 50 orders, it'd be a big deal. And he came back, he had over 500 orders. So she started a business in her parents' attic. Eventually, and she hired only women to create these. And some of our listeners, I'm old enough to remember, I think they may still do this in grade school, but I'm old enough to remember in elementary school where we would make our own Valentines, and you then tried to very meticulously cut them out so that they would open up and they would be lacy. That's what a Howland Valentine is. And if actually we could show one, that the largest collection is at the Hallmark Museum in Kansas City. But she created these individual works of art. She created the patterns, and then she hired women in Worcester to work for her and to make them. They were all handmade. Eventually, her business got so large, she moved from her parents' attic to a building in downtown Worcester. And eventually, she started this in 1850, by 1885, she had become ill and could no longer run it. She sold it to a local uh, competitor, but she actually created. It'd be a stretch to say she created the greeting card industry because there were some people in Albany and elsewhere doing Christmas cards earlier. But she is really one of the fundamental creators. I'm going to put her with the group. She's not the creator of the American greeting card industry, but she is one of the major figures in creating that. And of course, that would be tied into with the birth of the women's movement in the 1840s and 1850s, because contrary to what most people think, I know there's Smithsonian listeners who actually know far more about it than I do. The women's movement didn't begin pursuing the vote. The women's movement began pursuing property rights. And then, of course, they made the tactical discovery: you're not going to get those property rights because power in America is the vote. So we need to have the vote, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be a different program.
Just when you think Valentine's Day is all hearts and Hallmark, Dr. Andrew Roth, Smithsonian Associate, drops a detail that makes you rethink everything: a fertility ritual with goat meat, a holiday banned in France because it got too rowdy, and wait until you hear what 19th century Valentines were really saying. Some of them make modern dating apps look tame, but there's more. Coming up, Smithsonian Associate Dr. Andrew Roth unpacks how a 1-cent postage stamp, a teenage girl with a knack for lace, and a door-to-door salesman helped turn February 14th into a billion-dollar industry, and why, even today, we're still wrestling with what love should look like. Remember, Dr. Andrew Roth will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more details, but don't go anywhere. The next part of the story just might change how you feel about Valentine's Day for good. So stay tuned. More with Dr. Andrew Roth right after this. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone: Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not All Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Our guest today is Smithsonian Associate Andrew Roth. Andrew Roth will be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Valentine's Day, a very short history. Also talking about saints, sex, sentiment, and chocolate, all of the great subjects Andrew Roth will be talking about. We'll have links so that our audience can find out more information about Andrew Roth and his upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. Andrew Roth, you mentioned that some cultures throughout the world outlawed Valentine's Day because it was just too rowdy. And in England, for example, you talk a little bit about children who went Valentining like it was Halloween, perhaps dressing up in costume. Why do you think the holiday has always had this kind of tension with it between romance and chaos?
Well, that's another very good question, and it's because the holidays were a day to let go. They were a day in which a day of celebration. Now, the Valentining was very rare. That is not a very common occurrence.
Okay.
But it does have direct connections with caroling, and both Valentining and caroling have their connections with trick-or-treating. And one of the interesting things, as I said in this series on the history of American holidays, most of our holidays do in fact have pagan roots, and the trick-or-treating comes from Halloween, but Halloween comes from the ancient Celtic holiday of Samhain, in which the dead ancestors leave the grave and go back to their home asking for food. And if you didn't give them food, they would do a trick on you. That then connects, and the connection's kind of indirect, but that gives rise later to caroling and Valentining. Actually, mummers was similarly this going house to house. And so all of that rowdiness was just a time to let go. And it was really never a major part of the holiday.
The other kind of myth or story that I found in some of my research was this story about St. Valentine and the jailer's daughter. And I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about that, why stories like that persist with regard to St. Valentine's Day, because it seemed that it was more legend than actual fact.
Well, that's interesting. As I said a while ago, there were actually 3 St. Valentines, or 3. One is a North African, and people have to remember in the history of the early church, North Africa, as where St. Augustine was from, was Christian. It's later in the 6th and 7th century, the Muslim conquest. But early on, it was not much is known about the African Valentine, but there were 2 Valentines in Rome. One is St. Valentine of Rome and St. Valentine of Terni. They were both martyred within about 20 or 30 years of one another. And there is some suspicion they were the same person. St. Valentine of Rome was martyred, executed because by the Emperor Claudius II, because he refused to convert. He refused to renounce. And this is 200 years before that Pope I mentioned a while ago. Gelasius invokes this holiday in 494. Valentine is martyred 200 years before. In the late 3rd century, which is before Christianity becomes the official Church of Rome. So this is a small cult at that time. And he is martyred because he refuses to renounce his Christian faith. In the jail, the myth is, in the jail, he cures the jailer's daughter of her blindness. And he writes her a note and signs it, "Your Valentine," his name, allegedly the first Valentine card.
It's a wonderful holiday, and as you suggest, it is this time of coming together. I really like that reference, and I wonder if you'd tell us, for those of us in our audience who have celebrated Valentine's Day over the decades, with spouses, with pets, with children, grandchildren, what do you feel like is the most meaningful way to approach this holiday today?
The most meaningful way to approach this holiday today is to do something people don't do enough of. Tell the people you love that you love them. And if there's a particular person or people that you love, you can do that by giving them a card or giving them chocolate. That would be the most meaningful way to actually keep the one thing that's been true throughout the history, now almost 2 millennia, not quite 2 millennia, is this notion of affection and caring and caring. That would be it. And so I would say, if you're going to honor if you're going to celebrate Valentine's Day meaningfully, it is the whole purpose of it is to share your love for someone or some people, and so do that.
For your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, what's the most surprising historical fact that you'll unveil that always seems to get a gasp from the audience?
The origins that we just talked about. If you go deeper, and I do in the longer presentation, I go deeper into that. Yeah. And sometimes I think people are surprised that it was a major holiday. It actually was a major holiday. And in Renaissance England and actually in America until sometime in the middle of the late 19th century, it was the gift-giving day. It was the gift-giving day. Christmas overwhelmed the American way of Christmas, which is another thread in that holiday series, really takes root in the 1840s, 1850s. But prior to that, Valentine's Day was the major gift-giving day. And in fact, in the Renaissance, it was probably, in Renaissance Europe, particularly Renaissance England, it was the gift-giving day.
It's just really an amazing amount of information and so wonderful to talk to you about Valentine's Day. Andrew Roth, Smithsonian Associates, been our guest. We will have links so that our audience can find out more about Andrew Roth's work about his upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates about Valentine's Day, a very short history. It's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew Roth.
Well,
and we look
thank
forward
you.
to seeing you. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, and thank you.
Well, that was anything but your average Valentine's Day conversation. From ancient rites and medieval poetry to Cadbury's chocolate boxes and the rise of Hallmark, Smithsonian Associate Dr. Andrew Roth reminded us that this holiday, so often dismissed as sentimental fluff, is actually a cultural time capsule. And for those of us who've lived through changing love letters, traditions, and relationships, it's a reminder that every card, every flower, every quiet expression of affection carries a long, rich history behind it. Whether you celebrate with chocolates or simply memories, Valentine's Day still asks us to pause and say, I love you, in whatever way we can. To hear more of today's story and explore our full catalog of Smithsonian Associates episodes, visit us online at notold-better.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at NotOldBetter and on Instagram at NotOldBetter for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and more conversations that matter. Remember, Dr. Andrew Roth will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates. Coming up, please check out our show notes for more details about Dr. Andrew Roth at Smithsonian Associates for Valentine's Day. This has been a production of NOBS Studios. I'm your host, Paul Vogel, saying thanks for spending time with us. Be well. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better show on radio and podcast, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series. I hope you'll join me again next time.
You and I just wanted more.